Now, before I jump right into things, I'd like to start with a little survey. By show of hands, please, who here has a sense of humor? Very simple question. If you just have a sense of humor, if you like to laugh at all, you can. All right, excellent, thank you. Now, for my second question, who here proactively tries to be funny? All right, excellent. That's a lot fewer hands. That's fine. I appreciate your honesty because I spend a lot of time trying to convince people to be funny. Not in the way that you're probably terrified of. I'm not going up to strangers on the street with a microphone and going, "Hi there, would you mind being funny for me?" But I do run comedy workshops, which is often close enough. I run a lot of workshops, satire, stand-up comedy, improv. They're all free, and they're all run on a drop-in basis. So I spend a lot of time trying to get people to join every single week. And as you can probably guess by your second show of hands, not everybody's getting convinced. And I think that's a real shame. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that everyone has the ability to be funny. Everyone has a sense of humor. They just need the tools to use it. And then they have to want to use those tools. Because I'll remind you, everybody around you, when I asked if you had a sense of humor, put up their hands as well. So anyone can be funny as long as you're willing to try. The second thing I need to tell you off the bat is a bit more of a confession. It's a secret, not pleased about sharing it, but here goes. I have no idea how to teach anyone to be funny. In fact, I don't think anybody does. What I can do is I can teach you the toolkit of comedy, all the different pieces that you need to know to bring your sense of humor out into the world. And I think that's better, because when you start learning the toolkit of comedy, you're going to gain a whole bunch of other skills, almost by accident, and you're going to become a more fulfilled person. Now, let's say that you want to give this a try, and you actually come to a comedy workshop to try and get people to laugh. Well, before you start that, you're going to want to know their sense of humor, probably. You know, what can you reach out with? How can you get into their feelings? And then you're going to want to know what your sense of humor is. What do I think is funny? How do I put myself out there? And then you want to know what you want to perform. And if you're going to perform, you might as well warm up. So I'd like to start by talking about a comedy warm-up. One of my favorite comedy warm-ups is a very simple game. It's called the one-word story. You've probably tried it out for yourselves. In a one-word story, all you do is you go around in a group and each person takes a turn adding a word to the group story. You can do this around a kitchen table. You can do it in a room full of 100 people. Every single time you're going to get pretty much the same result. Roughly half the story will make sense. The main character might have 3 different names. And it'll take a massive twist a quarter of the way through that'll change the whole thing. Building a Pulitzer Prize-winning narrative is not the purpose of the one-word story. But you are going to learn 2 very important lessons about comedy. The first thing that you're going to learn is that sometimes the best thing that you can contribute to a one-word story is as a word, or the, or and that's totally fine. Because you're saying whatever it takes to progress things along, to move pieces forward. The first thing you need to know about the comedy toolkit is that it comes with a pressure release valve. You don't need to be on all the time. It's more about finding the moments where you can really make a strong contribution. And that lends itself beautifully to the second thing you'll learn in a one-word story, which is that when it's time to finally show up and contribute your word, you're going to need to think about every other word that someone has said before you. Where's this story going? What are the characters' names? What sort of grammatical tense do I need to use to make sure that everything makes sense and keeps going? And then you'll say your word out loud. And the next person's going to think about your word and every other word that came before it and go, all right, how can I help build on this? And 5 or 6 people later, that person's also going to go, all right, that was a beautiful sentence they just made. How do I start the next one? And suddenly, your small contribution becomes a strong part of the narrative. In comedy, this isn't a quirk. This isn't a one-off event. It's our core principle. It's called yes and it is the most important part of the toolkit of comedy. Yes and isn't just a series of actions. It's a philosophy. It's a commitment to take in all the ideas that are brought to you and then build on them as if they were your own, by accepting the premises, by accepting the ideas that everyone else is going to bring to the table. And in exchange, everyone you're with is going to do the same thing for you. When you put an idea out into the world, everyone is going to accept it, and then they're going to help you build on it as if it was their very own. And what this creates is a really powerful cycle of commitment, of sharing ideas, of acceptance and construction. And then those new constructions are committed to and accepted by everyone else. And it is this beautiful, never-ending cycle that I think is a beautiful thing. So powerful. And it's not just for comedy either. You can bring it out in other aspects of your life. But once you've learned how to accept and build on people's ideas, a game that you might like to try is called What Else Is True? In this game, you're still going to go around in a circle, but you're going to tell the exact same story every time. The only thing you're going to change is most of the details. For example, if somebody starts off with a relatively true, lightweight story, something like, "Today I went to the store to get some milk, and on my way home I stepped in a giant puddle." Well, the next person might listen to that, figure out where they think they can make some changes, and tell a story like, "Today I went to the store to get some milk, and on my way home I stepped in a giant puddle of milk," which is different, which is new. They've just found what we might call the game of the scene. The core idea, the thing we can change, the elements that stand out to us. And this requires using your sense of humor quite a bit, because you're going to make tweaks where you think you can find something funny. What parts stand out to you? And then everyone else is going to make changes that stand out to them, and you're going to learn their sense of humor, and you're going to learn how to process a story and turn it into something a bit lighter, a bit funnier. I'll give you one more example. Here's a story. "Today, I went to a TEDx conference, and I stood on the red circle." Well, what if that becomes, "Today, I went to a TEDx conference, and I stood on the red circle," which is slightly different and a little bit funnier, because it's nice to be able to build up to a laugh sometimes, especially when it's unexpected. But that's not all that comedy's good for. You can also use it as a processing tool. Because something that's really valuable about comedy is that it allows you to make light of situations that you don't quite understand. And in this day and age, I don't know if you know, there's a lot of confusing news articles out there. There's a lot of stuff that people get upset about on a regular basis. And when you run into an article that just doesn't work for you, we have a joke writing exercise for that. It's called an incongruity exercise, and I'd like to walk you through one right now. This is a real headline. It's from the New York Post. It's about a year old now. "Rumored Disney maternity ward at Magic Kingdom has expectant parents buzzing." This is a weird article. In this article, you've got two different elements that don't quite fit together. You've got Disney World, which we all understand, and maternal health care, which we all understand maybe a little bit less. So how do we use this to write a joke? Well, it's very simple. All we have to do is start with the process. We make a list of everything those two topics make us think of. For maternal health care, doctor, hospital, epidural, water birth. For Disney World, Tomorrowland, the Hall of Presidents, princesses, Cinderella's castle. Why not? And all we have to do to write a joke is look at those two categories and see, where do they line up? What makes sense? How do we connect them together? And that's where we end up with something like, "A rumored Disney maternity ward at Magic Kingdom has expectant parents buzzing. Most of the operations will be handled by doctors, but the Little Mermaid is standing by if you need an under-the-sea section." Now, of course, puns are one way to tell jokes, but what if you really want to express yourself, put your own ideas out there? Well, I have good news for you. That's actually the format of most comedy. You see, so many of your favorite pieces that you see online, stand-up sets, improv material, it all comes from a singular place. You've got a topic, and you've got the performer's feelings toward that topic. Topics and emotions, that is the foundational piece of so much of performed comedy. Whether it's Jerry Seinfeld feeling nostalgic for Pop-Tarts or George Carlin being angry at the 7 words you can't say on television, they're still working with the exact same toolkit that you can learn. In improv, it's very similar. You've got people who are trying to figure out what their relationship and feelings towards each other are on stage, how they feel about what's happening around them, and how those emotions interact in real time. This requires playing around with a lot of heightened emotion. And if you want to play with heightened emotion, we've got an improv game for that. It's called Love, Hate, Indifferent. It's really simple. You can do any sort of scene. It's open, it's flexible. You can have any sort of location or occupation. All you need are 4 people. And each of those 4 people is going to make a choice in their head before the scene starts. And they're not going to tell anyone. But of the other 3 people they're performing with, they're going to choose one person to absolutely adore, one person who they will completely despise, and one person who they will be totally indifferent to. And if that sounds like an episode of The Real Housewives and like the messiest thing you've ever heard of, you are absolutely correct. But what ends up happening is you get to see how all these strong emotions interact. You get to play in that sandbox. You know, maybe it's not normally fun to propose marriage to somebody who absolutely hates your guts, or to just stand there indifferent while somebody tells you how much they really, truly hate you. But on stage, in a toolbox, it's fun. It's light. It's a lot of strong emotions that you get to process in the form of a game, and then working with emotions becomes a huge part of your comedy toolkit. Finally, I want to talk about one last improv game. This is a real one. You can see this out in the world if you go to a show, or you can try it out for yourself. It's called the Armando. And in an Armando, you have someone come up on stage, a monologist, who delivers a monologue, some true stories about their life, some things that they're thinking about, usually inspired by a word from the audience. And then you and your improv team are going to do as many scenes as you'd like, all inspired by that monologue. This game is not that easy. It takes every single tool in your toolkit because you're going to need to yes and your teammates' ideas. You're going to need to figure out exactly where the game's coming from, what parts stand out to you, and you're going to need to wrap it all in an emotional narrative. And then you're going to have a team with you, and you're going to have an audience. And you're going to need to make that audience laugh. And you're going to need to get that team on your side to help you tell your jokes without any planning. And that's where the final tool in the comedy toolkit that I want to talk about today is empathy. Empathy, in this case, is the ability to understand what's going to make other people laugh. How am I being perceived by everyone else? What can I do to be supported by my teammates and show them how I'm feeling? How are they feeling, and how are they going to react to me? How do we together build a funny scene? Now, I know that sounds like an incredibly difficult thing to figure out, and I have good news. You are absolutely right about that. It's very hard, but it's worth it. I'm 21 years old. I don't want anyone to leave this talk thinking that I am a perfectly empathetic person who has everything figured out. There are easy days and there are hard days. There are struggling days and there are days where I get to reach out to people and it is beautiful. But until we get the chips in our heads that show us what everyone else is thinking at all times, we have to keep trying. And it's hard. And I think it's completely worth it. Because if you can build up the toolkit of comedy, if you can develop all these skills, if you can find a way to express your sense of humor to the world, then it stops being about putting on a performance when somebody shoves a microphone in your face. It stops being about jumping in to get a laugh. It's about building something together. It's about figuring out where you can contribute, how you can process the world, how you can laugh for yourself and for everyone else. It's about using the toolkit of comedy to make a positive splash in someone else's life. And I think that's beautiful. So now, one more time. Raise your hand if you have a sense of humor. And now, raise your hand if you're willing to give being funny a try. Excellent. Thank you very much.